All right, so what I want to do here is talk about something called the reduce array method. This is an array method that's very, very powerful. So I'm going to take 2 videos at this point to go over some of the things that you can do with this. And then later on in the course, I'll show you some of the more advanced things you can do. So right now, this is really helpful for us if we want to find the sum of all the elements in an array. Basically, what the array method reduce does is it reduces the array to a single value, okay? So let's start off with something that we know, a very simple example. I'm going to go const, and let's call this numbers, and let's set this up as maybe 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and 30. We already know how to get the sum of the elements of an array. So we can use the forEach method or for loop or whatever you want to do. Let's just set up a little function. We'll call it getSum, okay? And here I'm going to pass in an array, so you can do it like this. Again, we've been talking about the rest parameters, so if you want to make it more dynamic, you can use a rest parameter here. So this means you could actually pass in the comma-separated values, or if you wanted to pass in an array, you would first need to spread it out first, okay? So this makes it a little bit better. I'll probably change this up as we move on. I'm just getting a little practice with you for right now. So basically what I want to do is start off with something that's going to hold the sum as we're going through, right? So in other words, as we're going through this, guys, we start off with 5 and then we go to 10. So what is 5 plus 10? That's 15. Then we've got to add 15 to 15 to get 30, then 30 to 20 to get 50, and then 50 to 25 to get 75, and then 75 to 30 to get 105. But we need something that's going to hold those values as we go through. And so generally speaking, I always call this my sum, but on MDN, you'll see for the reduce method, they call it the accumulator. Okay, so I'm just going to call this let my sum, and I'm going to start this out with 0 because again, if you just go let my sum, it's going to be undefined. When you start off this thing going undefined plus 5, you're going to get not a number. Okay, so you're starting with a value of 0. So what I'm going to do is each time through, I want to do something like, let's say the starting value is 0. So my sum, I want to go plus equals the current element. So let's just call it number. Well, in this case, let's just say it's 5. Okay, so this would give me a result of 5 for my sum. Then I want to go my sum plus equals, in this case, it would be 10, right? So now it would hold 15. Then I want to do my sum plus equals, I want to do 15. So now this guy would hold 30, right? So let's just translate this process into computer code. Let's go ahead and wipe this and do something like the array. Okay, that's the name of the guy right there. So then dot the forEach method. And inside of here, I'm just going to use an arrow function. Since the array is called numbers, let's just call it number, okay, to keep it simple. I'm going to point my arrow here, and then basically all I want to do is my sum, okay? So whatever this is, whatever's held in there, I want to go plus equals the number, okay? So the current element. So think about it. The first time through, my sum is 0. We're going to add 5 to that, so my sum is going to hold 5. Then the next time through, it's going to be 5 plus 10, which is 15. Then the next time through, it's going to be 15 plus 15, which is 30, right? Then we're going to add 20 to get to 50, then add 25 to get to 75, then add 30 to get to 105. Now, at the end, the my sum is going to hold the value of 105, but we haven't done anything with it, so we need to return, and I didn't spell that correctly, so return the my sum variable, okay? So if we call this guy, if we go console.log, and I go get sum, again, because of how I structured this here, if you want to pass in the numbers array as it is, you need to spread it out first so then it can then collect it back into an array, okay? So I'm just going to spread this, okay? And then I'm going to go numbers like this. Okay, so let's go ahead and pop open the terminal and let's run this guy. And you see you get 105 as expected. All right, so what I want to do now is just quickly head to MDN. This is a page I highly suggest that you read. So we have this array.prototype.reduce. So the reduce method executes a reducer function. So this is something you provide. It's a callback function on each element of the array, resulting in a single output value. So typically you'll see an arrow function with this, but I'm going to start off by just using an anonymous function and then I'll convert it over because when you first start, this is a little bit confusing. It kind of hides the fact that this is being returned here. Okay. So basically, if you look at their example, you have this array 1 and it contains 1, 2, 3, and 4 in it. And you see they have this accumulator here. You can think about this as the my sum that we just set up. And then the current value, you can think about that as the number, right? So this is basically as we're going through, it would be, the first element, then the second element, the third element, the fourth element. And that changes based on whether or not you have an initial value, but I'll talk about that in a moment. So you see here, they're returning the accumulator plus the current value. So I'll explain that in our example. So let's come down here. And you see that the reducer function takes 4 arguments. So the accumulator, the current value, the current index, and the source array. So number 3 and number 4, you're not really going to use that often, but it's going to be available to you. And basically you see that your reducer function's returned value is assigned to the accumulator, okay, whose value is remembered across each iteration throughout the array and ultimately becomes the final single resulting value, okay? So that's very important. As you return this value, it's getting stored in this accumulator so that it's remembered across each iteration, okay? So when we come down here, you see the setup for this. You have your accumulator and your current value, and then basically you have your index and your array. And then this is the initial value. I'll talk about this. Sometimes you need this and other times you can just leave it. Okay, it depends on what you're working with. So you see here for index, for array, and for initial value, it's optional. This is kind of important to read through here though. A value to use as the first argument to the first call of the callback. If no initial value is supplied, the first element in the array will be used as the initial accumulator value and skipped as current value. Okay, so very important to understand that. I'll show you that here in a moment. And then you have your return value here, which is the single value that results from the reduction. So let's go back and let's think about how we can get this translated over. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to call function and I'm going to say get, maybe just get some two. Okay, we'll do the same thing here. So ... array. Again, if you don't care about getting practice with this, you can just type array in there, whatever you want to do. And then instead of doing all this let my sum and then the array.forEach, I'm just going to call the array.reduce method, okay? Inside of here, instead of using an arrow function to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to type function, and then I'm going to type in here ACC for accumulator and CUR for current, okay? And then basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to just return, okay? I'm just going to return the ACC, which is the accumulator, plus the current, okay? So that's all I really need to do. And I'll explain how this works in a moment with a more detailed example. But for right now, since this guy is going to end up reducing to one value, we just want to return that value, okay? So if you don't do anything with this, nothing's going to happen, right? If you do this like this and you call the function, let me come out here and just call this real quick. So console.log, and I go get sum2, and we go ... numbers, okay, like this. What's going to happen is you're not going to get anything. So you're basically going to get undefined because this guy executes this, but then the function itself, the get sum2, doesn't return anything, so it's just going to give you undefined. So let's pop this open. Let's clear this out and let's run this. And you see you get 105 and then undefined. So all we want to do to fix that is come back here and return this guy. So it's going to go through here, and we know in this case it's going to give us a result of 105. So it's going to reduce that array to 105, and then we're going to return 105. So we're going to see 105 twice, right? So let's go ahead and maybe we'll put a little border here. So console.log, maybe we'll put a little border here so we can see what it's from, okay? Let's pop open the terminal again, and let's clear this out and run this. You see you get 105, then your border, and then 105 again. So it does the same thing, it's just a little bit simpler. Let's go through some of the details, okay? And to do that, I'm just going to erase this guy right here altogether. We don't need it anymore, okay? Let's get rid of that. Let's just call this get sum, and let's call this get sum down here, okay? So we're not confused. And basically, I'm going to change this array up a little bit, make it simpler. Let's do maybe something like 2, 4, 6, 8, and maybe 10, something like that. And so what I want to do is just come down here, and let me put some other parameters in here. Remember, you have access to the index, and you have access to the array, okay? So I'll call this ARR for array. Now, instead of just returning something, I'm just going to do some console.logs. So I'm going to console.log. And basically inside of here, let me go ahead and say that we'll do some backticks, and let me do ACC like this for accumulator, $ curly braces ACC like this, okay? So let me copy this and paste it a few times, okay? So let me grab this one and this one at the same time, and we'll put CUR, okay? And let's come down here and let's do index like this. And then for this one, because this would make it into a string, I'm just going to write ARR for array in there, okay? So we can see what's going on. Now, what's going to happen is this is going to give you a little bit of insight into how this works. So let's pop open the terminal and let's run this guy. So when you come back up here, you see that your accumulator starts with 2 because we didn't supply an initial value. And I'll show you how to change that in a moment. the current is 4. So it's going to start with this as the current because this is the initial value. So if you don't provide an initial value, it takes the first element, okay? So it's going to skip that over, and basically it's going to start with a current of 4. The index is 1 because you're in the second position. So 2 plus 4 is 6. So that gets returned, right? Because you're doing accumulator plus current, you're returning that. So it returns 6, and that gets stored in the accumulator on the next iteration, right? So now we have 6 as the accumulator. The current is 6, right? Because you're all the way over here now. 6 plus 6 is 12, okay? So now your accumulator is 12, right? Then you add 12 plus 8, you get 20, right? So now your accumulator is 20. And then lastly, your current is 10, so 20 plus 10 is 30, okay? So then we return that value because the array with the elements 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10 got reduced to 30, so that's what we return. Okay, and you can verify that 2 plus 4 is 6, 6 plus 6 is 12, 12 plus 8 is going to be 20, and then 20 plus 10 is 30. Now, lastly, if I put a comma here and put something like 0, now this is going to be my initial value. So when we start off, this ACC guy, this accumulator, starts at 0. Okay, so it's not going to use this as the initial value. It's going to use 0. So you'll see that your current is going to be 2 and the index will say 0. Okay, so let me pop this back open and let's run this guy. So if we go back up here, now you see your accumulator starts with 0. Your current is 2. Okay, and the index is 0. So now you get 0 plus 2, which is 2. So now in the accumulator, you have 2 now. Okay, so you see it's just basically a different way to do it. In some cases, you're going to need to supply an initial value. In other cases, you won't. Okay, so let me pop this back closed. And let me show you a few other things. So let's say that the initial value, you didn't put 0. Let's say you put 10. Okay, what is this going to do? Just pause the video and think about it. Well, basically, you're going to add 10 to the result of summing all the elements of an array. So now the return value is going to be 40, right? Because you're starting out with 10, and then you're adding 2 to that, so you're getting 12, and then you're adding 4 to that, so you're getting 16, you know, so on and so forth. So if we pop this back open, and we run this again, now you start off with an accumulator of 10. Again, the current is 2, the index is 0. So now 10 plus 2 is 12, so that gets stored as accumulator. So the next round through, 12 plus 4 is 16. That gets stored here, so you have 16 plus 6, that's 22, you know, so on and so forth. If you look at your ending return value, it's going to be 40. Okay, so we can get rid of this. And let me show you how to do this with an arrow function, because typically that's how you're going to do this. So you're going to remove your function keyword. Okay, so you're going to get rid of that. Because you're going to have 2 parameters here, you still need parentheses. I'm going to get rid of the index and the array guy there. You don't need them, okay? And I'm not going to need the braces here because I'm just going to return one thing, okay? So remember, if this is all on one line, you can get rid of the return keyword. And basically, I'm just going to put my arrow in here, and that's going to fix that. And let me get rid of this really quickly. Okay, so let's put this in here like this. Now, if you wanted to specify an initial value, you could just put a comma and put 0. Okay, so let me show you that. So let's run this guy, and you see you just get 30. Okay, and if you go back and you get rid of this initial value, it's going to work the same in this case. So if we pop this back open, you run this, you still just get 30.